All right, so Argentina's energy sector. We're diving into a paper today called Energía Soberanía,
Which translates to
energy sovereignty. Catchy, right?
definitely grabs your attention.
It's all about who really controls Argentina's energy. And we're talking about a country with the third largest electricity network in all of Latin America.
Third largest. Wow.
Yeah, but it hasn't been an easy road to get to where they are now.
That's what this paper is going to unpack for us.
Exactly. This paper digs into the history, especially how a powerful few ended up controlling so much.
So we're talking about like an oligarchy in the energy sector.
You got it. And to really understand how it happened, we need to rewind back to the 1990s.
Okay, the 90s. What was happening then?
Picture this. Argentina gets hit by this wave of privatization in the energy sector. It's like a prime target.
So going from like state-run to private companies taking over.
Exactly. And that's where these names come in Pampa Energia, Grupo Desa, Grupo Sedesa. They swooped in during this privatization frenzy.
And I'm guessing they saw an opportunity.
A huge one. Argentina still needs a ton of energy, but they also had this history of, economic ups and downs.
So a bit of a risk, but also a huge potential reward.
Exactly. And for these companies, it seems like that risk paid off. This paper argues that they quickly became the major players.
Almost like an oligopoly forming right there in the energy sector.
Exactly. And that's where this term captive market comes in. The paper uses it a lot, and it's kind of unsettling when you think about it.
A captive market. What does that even mean in this context?
Well, it means these Argentine people needed electricity, right? Right. And these companies, they were basically the only game in town.
So not much room for, say, negotiating prices or demanding better service.
Not really. The paper argues that this lack of competition gave them a lot of power. And remember, this is the 90s. The big idea globally was that privatization equals efficiency, right?
Right, the invisible hand of the market doing its thing.
Exactly. But did that actually happen in Argentina? That's the big question this paper raises.
So these private companies step in, they've got this captive market. What happens next?
Well, the paper argues that these energy companies focused on maximizing profits. And maybe not so much on, actually investing in the system, making it better.
So short-term gains over long-term sustainability.
That's one way to put it.
And what did that look like in practice? What were they doing that was maybe not so great?
One example the paper gives is this heavy reliance on natural gas.
Interesting, because Argentina has a lot of potential for, like, hydroelectric power, right?
They do. And hydro is generally considered a lot more sustainable than natural gas.
So why weren't they utilizing that more?
Well, the paper suggests it comes down to this. Natural gas was readily available, and it brought in those quick profits.
Ah, so it was the easiest, most profitable route, at least in the short term. But what about the long-term consequences? Did that catch up with them?
It did catch up with them. Fast forward to the early 2000s, Argentina gets slammed by this huge economic crisis.
Yeah, not a great time to be reliant on fossil fuels with global energy prices going haywire.
Exactly. And remember those energy giants drowning in debt.
A lot of it in foreign currency, too? Ouch.
A recipe for disaster.
Total disaster. It was a perfect storm. The Argentine peso plummeting in value, energy costs skyrocketing globally.
And those private companies stuck holding the bag.
They were in way over their heads.
So what happened? What did the government do in response to all this?
It was all hands-on-deck crisis mode for sure. The paper does a good job of outlining the emergency measures they took.
And this is where that idea of energy sovereignty really takes center stage, right?
Absolutely. This crisis brought the whole debate about who controls energy into sharp focus.
So tell me more about these emergency measures. What did they actually do?
Well, one of the biggest things was converting energy tariffs to pesos.
Sounds kind of logical when you say it like that. Pay for your energy in your local currency.
Right, except the peso was incredibly weak at that point. Those energy companies were suddenly earning a fraction of what they were used to.
Wow, I bet that didn't go over well with them. Talk about a blow to their profits.
You can say that again. But it wasn't just the currency switch. The government also froze energy prices for consumers.
Trying to shield everyday people from the soaring costs.
Exactly. They were in a tough spot trying to protect their citizens, but it meant the energy companies were getting squeezed even harder.
Caught between a rock and a hard place.
Totally. They couldn't raise prices to make up for the losses they were already taking because of the currency devaluation.
So how did the Argentine people fare through all of this?
Honestly, not great. The paper talks about how the crisis led to energy shortages, blackouts, There was a lot of public anger.
I can imagine.
People were frustrated with rising costs, unreliable service, and the feeling that these private companies were putting profits ahead of people.
Which plays right into that energy sovereignty argument, right?
Exactly. It became a rallying cry, this idea that energy is such a vital resource, it shouldn't be left in the hands of a few powerful companies, especially foreign companies.
So it's like this crisis exposed the cracks in a system that was already pretty fragile. But then, just when you think it can't get any more complicated, Argentina discovers Vaca Muerta.
Talk about a plot twist. 2012, suddenly they're sitting on one of the largest shale, gas, and oil reserves in the world.
A potential gold mine.
It was a game changer. This paper really emphasizes just how significant the discovery of Vaca Muerta was.
Because we aren't just talking about energy independence here. We're talking about a potential economic boom.
Huge economic implications. At least that's the hope surrounding Vaca Muerta.
Okay, but this is the deep dive for a reason. Let's dig a little deeper. The paper mentions some challenges when it comes to actually exploiting Vaca Muerta. It's not as simple as just drilling a few wells and raking in the cash.
Not even close.
Yeah.
One of the biggest hurdles is the technology needed. We're talking about fracking here, which comes with a whole host of environmental concerns.
Yeah, fracking is a pretty controversial method.
To say the least. So Argentina has to weigh these potential economic benefits against some very real environmental costs. And then, of course, there are the political implications.
Which are?
Well, who gets to exploit this resource? How are those profits going to be distributed? These are all questions that Argentina is still grappling with.
So it's this balancing act, right? Trying to weigh the economic opportunities against the environmental concerns. And of course, you've got the political side of things, too. But this paper isn't just about fossil fuels, is it?
Not at all.
Because Argentina's been making some moves in the renewable energy space, too.
They have. Around the same time as the Vaca Muerta discovery, they started investing a lot more in renewables.
So we're talking wind, solar, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Wind and solar especially. It's like they're trying to hedge their bets, prepare for a future beyond fossil fuels.
Which is smart, especially with the whole world pushing for clean energy. But I have to imagine that adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. You've got Vaca Muerta, you've got renewables, and then you've got this history of the oligopoly in the energy sector. How is all of that playing out in Argentina today? What does the paper say about that?
It's actually a pretty fascinating picture. Those big players we talked about, Pampa Energía, Grupo Sedesa, they're still a major force in the energy sector.
So not much has changed on that front.
Not really. They're still major players. Then you have Vaca Muerta, which is this huge opportunity, but also a huge question mark. There's a lot of debate about how to develop it responsibly, ethically even.
Because of the potential environmental impact?
Exactly. And then on top of all that, you have this push for renewables, which faces its own set of challenges.
Like what? What kind of challenges are we talking about here?
Well, funding is a big one. And infrastructure. You need the money and the physical infrastructure to support a transition to renewables.
Which takes time. And money, like you said.
And sometimes you even have pushback from the people who benefit from the status quo, the ones who are doing quite well from fossil fuels. Thank you very much.
Right. So there's a lot to unpack here. It sounds like Argentina's energy sector is at a real crossroads. They're trying to balance these different interests, figure out a path toward a more sustainable energy future.
They are. And that's where the idea of energy sovereignty comes back into play.
Because ultimately, it's about who gets to make those decisions about Argentina's energy future.
Precisely. And the paper makes it clear that this debate is far from over in Argentina.
So no easy answers here.
Not really, but it's definitely a situation worth paying attention to.
It certainly seems like Argentina's energy sector is anything but boring. We've gone from privatization to crisis, stumbled upon this massive shale reserve, and now we're witnessing this push for renewables. And throughout it all, this question of who controls energy remains central.
It's a story with so many layers, and it's still being written.
It really is. For our listeners, if you want to dive deeper into this fascinating story, we'll have links to the paper we discussed, along with some other resources, in our show notes. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.